Hi, it's Claire, and today I thought I would make a video that a lot of booktubers have just made or just published, uploaded, and that is my top 10 of my favorite books of 2017. So before I begin, I want to say that these are my top 10. They're not in any particular order. They're just kind of in the order that I read them in last year, and they were most definitely not published in 2017. They're just books that I read in 2017. Before I get into my top 10, I wanted to say that I had other books that I loved this year because that's how I justify being a book hoarder. You keep them if you're going to reread them, right? And sometimes you want to revisit old friends, settings, the places that you love. And so, without further ado, let me start. One series that I reread last year was the Codex Alera series by Jim Butcher. I hope that you guys have heard of this because it's amazing. It's fantasy and it's got a really Roman feel to it. Roman gladiators, centurions, they have magical bonds with kind of elements, which they call furies, and these spirits made of elements are their friends, and you can bond with one or more, and they give you sort of powers. And it's about, a boy who discovers his powers much later than everyone else, and then it turns out, that's for a reason, and everything's for a reason. It's just an absolutely beautiful series. Everything about it is wonderful. There's 6 books, and they're fairly long, 673 pages in this first one, but don't let that intimidate you. I seriously recommend this. I like it when authors create their own worlds like this, and it's something that I really appreciate. I also reread The Wicked and the Divine, graphic novel series. Now I reread this so that I could get to the last one. I have book amnesia, movie amnesia, all of this stuff. I have a very busy life. I have a very hectic life. I've got a million pets, I have a million children, and it's hard for me to kind of retain a lot of information in my mom brain. Before reading the next book of any series, I like to reread the entire series. So as you can imagine, I've read like the first Game of Thrones book many times. I can't even begin to tell you the Wheel of Time and things like that, but I reread this and I loved it again. Premise of this real quick is that gods are real, they come to Earth every 90 years, and they die in 2 years. It's young people becoming gods, and the gods are worshipped as like pop stars and like rave hosts and things like that, and it's very strange, but the art is beautiful, the story is beautiful. It's the only thing I hate is that you get attached to the characters and then they die. They always die because, well, it says right on the cover, like, in 2 years they're all gonna die, so you just kind of have to accept it, which is hard. Also, Saga. Do I have to say anything about Saga? I don't think anybody has not heard of Saga. Futuristic, sci-fi, amazing, absolutely amazing. Everybody loves Saga. That were rereads for me. I reread a few series. I'm very excited to read volume 8. I did reread them all last year, so I don't think I'm going to have to reread the whole thing in order to kind of remember everything, because it was, I don't know, a few months ago. Hopefully I can just pick up volume 8 and know where I am and what I'm doing. Another series that I reread this year was the Ice Rigger trilogy by Alan Dean Foster, and that is very good. I read it on Kindle, so unfortunately I don't have a physical copy to show you, but Alan Dean Foster writes amazing sci-fi. Some of his stuff is a little hit and miss, but everything in the Humanx world is amazing. It's there's basically, humans and then another alien species that are kind of like giant bees that we met, and we formed this whole kind of imperium where like we invite other worlds to join us, and it's a commonwealth, actually. The Ice Rigger trilogy is about a human who was stranded on this Arctic planet, crash landed there. I think it's a few humans. Anyway, so they make friends with these giant fuzzy teddy bears with built-in skates. And they have kind of a feudal society, and it's very cool. It's definitely worth reading. It's all about their adventures on this planet, and it's 3 volumes, and they're so good. So I highly recommend pretty much everything by Alan Dean Foster. I mean, some of his books don't really do it for me, but most of his books do. Now, onto my top 10 books that I did read for the first time in 2017. Book number 1 was a series, actually. Dan Abnett, he writes for Warhammer, and these first, I think it's 7 books in his series called First and Only, they follow an army unit in the Grand Imperial Army, and they're led by Gaunt. He's their leader, and they're called Gaunt's Ghosts because the planet that his ghosts are from is dead. It died as he was taking them off the planet through no fault of his own, obviously. They don't blame him for that. So his ghosts are just a skilled and intriguing, interesting group of characters who kind of have to fight through. They're fighting for this giant Imperium. Your orders just come from high up. You're slogging through the trenches. You go and fight on this world. You go and fight on that world. You have to face all kinds of creepy shit, and you just kind of read about their adventures. He is so good at writing this style of book that veterans have said, wow, how do you know about like that feeling of fighting in the trenches? And he just captures it perfectly. And he's got like Mad Larkin, the sniper, and Try Again Bragg, who is such a shitty shot that they always say, try again, Bragg. So that's where he gets his nickname from. Who's like this huge guy who like shoulders the, you know, heavy cannon fiery things. And other characters like that you fall in love with. And this series actually goes for, I think, like 14 books, but they recently re-released 7 of them in these gorgeous covers, and I will include a clip to show you, because I'm not going to get them all down. So here is a shot of my First and Only series by Dan Abnett. I didn't want to take these all down because it would upset all my Doctor Who Funko Pops and some of my boyfriend's Warhammer figures, and yeah, so there's the whole Warhammer kind of shelf there with most of our Warhammer books. It's over half for sure. It's very cool, sci-fi, futuristic, fighting in the trenches. I love the world made by Warhammer. I love the lore. I love the whole thing. But what makes Dan Abnett's books stand out is that his characters are so relatable, even though they're 40,000 years from us, but they're so human, and it's amazing. I could not recommend those enough. Definitely check those out if you are a fan of sci-fi, if you're a fan of like books, if you're a fan of good books with good characters and an excellent setting. The first one, the plot is kind of but it sets up the rest. So get through the first one and try the rest, because it's worth it. So, number 2, Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Obviously this is a classic, and it's something that I'd never read before. I watched the new Sherlock Holmes series that was on Netflix, and I loved it, and I just needed to read this, and I did. And so it comes in 2 volumes published by Bantam Classics, and I like this. It's cute. It's little. I mean, a lot of people, you know, are in love with hardcovers and whatever, but if you treat them right, your mass market paperbacks will be your friend, and they are my friends. Volume 1 and 2 of the complete novels and stories of Sherlock Holmes. I loved them. I really did. And I'm not going to elaborate on them because Sherlock Holmes, everybody kind of knows. It's like the line from Star Wars. Everybody knows, Luke, I am your father, even though that's not actually what he says, and even though you haven't watched Star Wars, you know that, you know, Darth Vader is Luke's father. So I'm not going to explain Sherlock Holmes, but I will say that the novels are worth reading, for sure. They're wonderfully written, of course. I feel like a lot of people kind of take classics for granted, but I find every time I read a classic, I'm like, wow, that's a classic for a reason. Out of all the books that were published, you know, in that last century, and that century before that, and that century before that, these ones survived. These ones survived because they're good, because they're worth reading. So for my book 3, it's The Golem and the Genie, and that's by Helen Recker, I believe. Helen Recker. Now, I can't find my copy. I moved a lot of books to the basement recently because my shelves were full, and I haven't actually unpacked them onto the basement shelf yet. Golem and the Genie, what can I say? It's beautiful. It's so beautiful, and it's about the human characters as well as the golem, as well as the genie, and it's just so amazing how everyone comes together and the stories integrate. It's a book that I'll never forget. I love it when a book sticks with you like that. Like, it's like when the beauty of it just remains after you've read it. You were like, just, wow, that was so good. So, that was so good. Okay, next book on my top 10, The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. And this, again, is the mass market paperback Bantam Classics version. I just think they're really cute. This is on my list because it is just, I think, the most interesting in terms of origin, because this is so old. It's written in like Middle English, and then there's a translation, kind of like reading Shakespeare, but this is even older. This book is a collection of tales told by all different characters, from the lowliest plowman to the noble knight. It's tales that they are retelling that sort of reflect their own life and their own values and their own place in society, their own place in the hierarchy. So this collection of tales was written before the year 1400, which I find incredible and just very humbling. Who can say they've seen into the 1300s, right? Read this and then you'll know. Book number 5 is another book that I don't actually have on me right now. Again, lost somewhere in this massive shelves. It's The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, and it's marketed as YA, I believe. It's marketed, like I've seen it in the young adult section in bookstores, and it's so powerful that it does not come across as YA. It's about when the Nazis are in power, and about a girl that loves books so much she steals them, and she's the book thief, and she's endearing and innocent, and then her world is she's living in the middle of a war. It's about her becoming aware of the realities of the world and not letting them break her. You could call it a modern classic, because I believe that it will be a classic. If it's not considered one already, I believe that it definitely has the potential to be a classic, and to be something that we hand down to future generations. So, number 6, Pretty Deadly. There's only 2 so far. Hopefully there will be more soon. The first one in particular was just so good. It's a Western with elements of mythology and fantasy. It's based on the premise that death is a being that can be reincarnated, but it doesn't say that right out, like, in the beginning. So I'm sorry if this is a spoiler. If it was me, it would make me want to read it more. But if you don't want to hear about this, then skip ahead and just trust me that this is beautiful and you should read it. It's based on the premise that death is a being that is reincarnated, or there's a new death chosen. But this certain death, he screwed up. He fell in love. He stopped tending the garden of life and death. He doesn't want to give up his seat in power as death to the next death born. He said, no, I don't want to do that. but he has to. And it's about kind of the fight with the new death and her friends, and it evolves beautifully. It's told by a butterfly and a dead rabbit, and I love that. I love how unique that is. So that is the butterfly. There is the dead rabbit, and they tell the story, and it's amazing. I mean, how cool is that? A story told by a butterfly and a dead rabbit. It's very, very good, and I feel like it's kind of underrated. I feel like not a lot of people appreciate it or know how good it is, so I thought I would get that out there. Like, this is good. You should read it. The colors are very, like, Western, very, it sticks with this theme, and it's beautiful. Book 7, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Now, my copy has a boo-boo. There's 2 magicians, and they have 2 apprentices, and these apprentices are in a battle of magic. So as their sort of stage for the contest, they make a circus, and they compete by making the most original, the coolest, the most entertaining, the most beautiful pieces for the circus. So they have this clock that's like the most amazing, beautiful mechanical clock with all of these little pieces and all of these little nuances. It's the clock to end all clocks. They have a room that is like where you're walking on clouds. It wouldn't be as amazing as it is without the author also being so amazing. There's a review here on the back by another author that says dark as soot and bright as sparks, and that really captures it. It's so beautiful. The world that she creates is so real. You can see it, you can imagine it, and it makes you happy, and it makes you feel like anything is possible, and it brings that spirit from it. It gives you that feeling. And it's the author that's done it. She's weaved these words together to create this world that's so, you can see it. You can see it and you can feel it, and it's beautiful. Book 8. This is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgarov. This is a Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition, and I love it. It's gorgeous. It's got the beveled edges. It's got these beautiful flippy flappy bits, and it's a wonderful story about the devil comes to town for a party and some fun, and there's a love story between the master and Margarita. This love story intersects with the devil coming to town and all of his shenanigans, all of his exploits, all of his adventures. And it's set in Russia, written during the darkest days of Stalin's reign. The Master and Margarita became a literary phenomenon, signaling artistic and spiritual freedom for Russians everywhere. And that's what it is, and it's beautiful, and it's amazing, and there's witches and devils and parties and magic shows and shenanigans. Book 8 is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I did not expect to like this as much as I did, because I read Coraline and Fortunately the Milk first, and they were very much middle grade books, and I don't have anything against middle grade. I find that they lack a depth of emotion because you don't want to scare the children. But this was amazing, and it blew me out of the water. And it's about a little boy who was going to be assassinated as a baby for reasons unknown, and then he's raised in a graveyard with ghosts. They chose to reveal themselves to him and raise him, and it's about his adventures growing up in the graveyard, and then his adventures leaving the graveyard, and about why and how he has to leave the graveyard, and why he was raised and educated by ghosts. Why was he going to be assassinated as a baby? Why have the ghosts been having to hide him all these years? It says deliciously dark, and it really is. If you're not into middle grade or whatever, this is better. The last book I wanted to say was one from the Horus Heresy, which I mentioned in my last video. It's based in the Warhammer world, set in 30K, so 30,000 years in the future. And it's kind of a prequel to all of their games and lore and things set in 40K. So this happens 10,000 years before Gaunt's Ghosts, that series that I was saying for my number one. So the one that I wanted to recommend, the one that I loved the most this year, and I read, I think, 20-something Horus Heresy books this year. The one that I loved the most was Prospero Burns by Dan Abnett. And there are different legions of these kind of elite space marines, and one of them is called the Space Wolves, and it's about this feral group of like angry guys. They come from like a Viking-esque planet, and you would think that they would be completely unrelatable. And then this guy crash lands there on their original homeworld of Fenris, and they decide to kind of take him in for various reasons, of which I'm not going to get into. I don't want to spoil it. In the ending, this guy that they took in and bonded with and fought with and became their friend, they have to part with him for certain various reasons. And he has to kind of go into like a coma voluntarily for a while. It broke my heart. I was literally crying. That's how attached Dan Abnett can make you get to characters that you would think would be completely unrelatable. Like feral space marines from a Viking-esque world. They don't get along with anyone. And then when they have to say goodbye to their friend, I bawled. So it definitely touched my heart. So those are my top 10 reads of 2017 and my rereads of 2017 of the books that I already loved. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you've gotten some recommendations and are ready to like look these up, put them on your Amazon wish list, whatever. If you could leave me some more recommendations, I'm always interested in new books to read and new worlds and stories to explore. Thank you. Bye.